You don't have to balk at, is that like reworking an epithet of Baal to say it's not that storm god, it's my god?
I think the creation myth is mythology. I think Noah's mythology. I think the Tower of Babel's mythology. I think Abraham's mythology. I think Jacob's mythology. I think Joseph's story is mythology. I think Moses' story. Dr. Joshua Bowen, me and you have been absolutely annihilated and defeated by apologetics
Time and time again.
Darth Dawkins killed you and you've resurrected like Inanna. I have been completely destroyed by Dyer. Who else can I think of? Oh, Michael Jones has already, people put that in the comments. Who else, man? Oh, Wes right now. But listen, Wes is like Marduk, where he doesn't even have to speak. Okay, so he's defeated us when we have
Just by his approach.
just by his demeanor.
Is he made Lamu?
Exactly. I wanted to address the Billy Carson stuff briefly about what our conversations with Billy, and then also assessing what became of the launching of this material when Billy didn't want this to go public. We spoke to him. He did say that, first of all, he was sick. He did not feel good. I think he had pneumonia or something. He said something like this, right? Well, Christians will interpret that and go, nice try, buddy, right? That's what they're going to do. And there's no stopping people from having those kind of things. But then, to go a little beyond, he did feel like even the host who invited him, like, snuck this up on him. And I'll tell you, if you go back and rewatch the debate, every time tensions start to happen, he starts to kind of butt in and like will interrupt and try to talk louder to kind of like, to calm down. Almost like he knew that Wes was going to come in and like jab at whatever Billy was bringing. We should probably lay a little background too. Billy has gone on record making statements about being a professional, the world's #1 expert on cylinder, scroll, papyrus, or whatever it is. It's ancient text. I pitched that to you and said, I see why Christians took that and used it to go, see, look at your world's expert in this, what they would consider, and even I would say maybe as a pseudo kind of alien kind of interpretation at the end of the day. But you are kind of a little more cautious about drawing that conclusion. And you think what he means maybe is that, like the Zecharia Sitchin's view, he's an expert in this kind of arena. Tell me what you're up to.
Yeah, I mean, me cautious, that doesn't sound like me.
All you are.
So, yeah, as we've been saying, like giving people like a gracious interpretation is, I think that's a good thing to do. Yeah. And so, in the same way that I think that, if Wes Huff says Leviticus 25 as a law against kidnapping, I'm not going to assume you're adult because you don't even know your Bible. You don't even know that that's Exodus and not Leviticus. I'm going to assume that he does know that it's Exodus 21:16 and not Leviticus 25, and he just misspoke. Yeah, and I think that's true.
It happens.
So, in this regard, I haven't seen these clips, where Billy Carson says, oh, I'm such and such expert in such and such things.
But when we talk to him, I'm sorry, I'm just in here. He literally says like, no, you guys are the experts. Yeah, he says that. That's what makes your interpretation of this like, what do you mean? Part of me wondered if it was kind of locker room talk, because one of the interviews, the guy goes, would you debate anyone? He goes, I'll debate anyone right here, right now. Like, what's up? I'm confident in my position. Like, so people are reading that and going, oh, he thinks he knows better than everyone.
Yeah. And so when I hear that, like one of the things that my mind kind of goes back to is my engagements with some of the ideas of Zecharia Sitchin back in the day. And of course, I'm an Assyriologist. I wrote my dissertation on Sumerian texts. So everybody expected that when we came into the public arena, that I knew all about Zecharia Sitchin. Of course, I had no idea who that was. And so in that sense, when I dug down into some of the things that Zecharia Sitchin wrote, like the book, The 12th Planet, he's utilizing the Sumerian language, making arguments from the language itself.
Right.
Here's what, of course, yeah, I mean, just incorrect.
Yeah.
Here's a Sumerian word. Here's a Sumerian verbal chain, whatever. Here's what it means. Even to the extent, I think, that either directly or implying that seriologists are translating it less than perfectly, let's say. The reality is that when you start to say things like that, now if I'm engaging with this material, I have to say, okay, look, you're wrong about your analysis of this verbal chain.
Yeah.
Just as an example, and this isn't but it's one that I think everybody would understand and grab immediately. Sumerian is a language that it uses cuneiform. So these wedge-shaped signs, and each cuneiform sign has its own. It's logographic, partially anyway. Logographic. So like, if you see the symbol, a cuneiform symbol for a star, that can mean like heaven. It can mean God, right? It's like the thing that's up there,
Right.
Right. If you see the symbol sung, or the thing that's supposed to be like a head, somebody's head, it can be like a person, right? Or a head, or whatever.
Right.
Anyway,
The image kind of reflects sometimes the thing.
that's right. So in Sumerian, they realize after a while that the word for like year or name is mu, mu, and or let's take an easier one. The word for milk is ga, right? And the word for sky is on, and the word for to build is do 3 specifically. But the way that you say, I promise I'm going somewhere with this. The way that you say I will build or let me build is you say gandu. The gan part is the let me, and the do is the verb. It's the verbal base, they say. So do 3 means to build. So gandu is let me build. Okay. In that word, God doesn't mean milk.
Right.
On doesn't mean sky.
You can find probably examples in English like this too.
Yeah, sure. Like butterfly.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean butter, stick of butter that flies around, right? It takes on a different meaning. So, but this is called the rebus principle. They realize that the word for the word for milk, ga, could also be used like phonetically, syllabically to form a larger word.
Right.
Gandu. Okay. An incorrect and invalid interpretive approach to these texts is to see the word gandu, ga-andu, and to read milk, sky, build. Milky Way was built.
Yep. Got it.
That's not what that means.
Okay.
Right? Okay.
We're getting somewhere.
By the way, if you're interested in learning Sumerian, I have a course that I'm getting ready to teach here in the beginning, January 13th. So if you'd like to teach, learn, if you'd like to learn Sumerian, there's a link that you can click on it and take a course if I teach it live. Because this stuff is really interesting. So it's those types of things that Zecharia Sitchin, he would look at a Sumerian word in transliteration, not in cuneiform, I think, but in it's the way that scholars lay it.
Piece it together, having kind of the alien idea.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, so all that to say this. If Zecharia Sitchin were to say, I'm an expert in Sumerian, I would say, miss me with that shit, right? Clearly, he's not.
I don't think that Billy ever said he's a linguistic expert. I think he did say cylinders, tablets, this, that. I know he talks with the emerald tablets or something to talk and all that kind of stuff. So clearly, I think your interpretation of him is more accurate, that he has a model at which he's approaching these.
Right. And that's what my gracious, I suppose, interpretation of what he is saying in that context is, maybe more broadly, I am what did you call it? Like ancient origins, or you called it something else, proto. No,
for him or you?
For that position of like, you've said it several times.
Yeah, for him, I mean,
paleo origins.
Yeah, paleo contact kind of.
Paleo contact. There you go.
Yeah.
So that's what I understood him to be saying through that interpretive lens. Like, given the material that's out there that he studied, that through his framework, he looks at pictures of Mars, or he looks at the Sumerian text in English translation, or the Akkadian text, the Enumelish or Anthroposis.
He's looking for that. You could do with the Bible, Ezekiel, these vision, like you could say that's a visit.
That's right. And if you're saying I am the foremost expert in understanding how all of these things point to early or ancient origins through, like early contact or whatever, then fine. I don't see a problem with that. Now, if that's not what he meant, and what he meant was I'm actually an expert in like early cylinder seals or early cuneiform or something like that, then obviously I'm going to have a problem with that.
Right.
But here's the thing. Like we've spoken with Billy.
Yeah.
And as you said, like he said, I'm not the expert, you guys are. So I think that even if that is what he meant, I think if I go to Billy and say, look, you need to recognize that you're not, I think he would very quickly take correct.
I'm sure he did, because he's like, look, you guys know this language, you know this stuff. And, he was very humble. Take that conversation. I'm thinking to myself, like, wow. And even if you watch his interaction with Wes, it only becomes more frustrating over time because Wes is trying to catch him falling.
Yeah.
You see it in there. And he told us he felt like he got
like ambushed.
Okay, so let's talk about our experience for one moment, because I think this is a perfect.
You mean when we got utterly defeated and destroyed?
Somehow we're still alive.
Yeah, right.
So I want to say, and you had it before me, but I got invited to do a talk, and it's rare that I have like Christian apologists on the other side wanting to have a conversation with me. But Neil from Gnostic Informal was like, hey man, listen, there's these two Christians, they're conservative Christians, Andrew Wolfson, and Jimba is his name. He goes by Jimba. Don't know what his real name is, but just goes by Jimba. Maybe his name's Jen and Ba. I don't know. Invited me on to have a conversation, and I am a conversationalist. I'm not a debater. I'm more of a conversation. Let's talk and reason. I want actual good conversations. Debates are about big measuring contests and who's right.
So they're about winning.
That's what I mean. Like who can win. And the tools that are used in a debate are beyond the information. They're rhetorical mostly and less about informative argumentation. If you're good at both, cool. If you're interested in doing both, but I try to avoid it for ego reasons. And also I get worked up and I'm competitive and also can get, to a point where I'm not going to think as clear when I'm trying to do this as fast as I can. And I'm also not a philosopher. I never have ever claimed to be one. The apologists claim that they are. Then I go to actual philosophers with PhDs who go, they don't know shit, but we'll get there. So I'm in this long stream talking to Andrew Wilson and Jim Bob about crazy stuff that I was actually very a bit uncomfortable by some of the questions. I'm like, dude, what is going on? Would you do this to this? It was really gross stuff. Would you do this to this human in order to save your family? These moral, ethical questions. And I'm like, I teeter-tottered between a simple ethical question I could answer, but then a real serious one I had to think about, which is about my family. And we went on, right? 2 hours into this, I had me hungry. So I messaged Jim Bob. I'm like, dude, bro, you got to go ahead and close me out. I'm really, really burning fumes. I'm hungry. It's been 2 hours. If you don't mind, can you exit me out? But I keep getting lured back into another thing that Jim Bob brings in. Explain logic without using logic. Tell me intelligence without using intelligence. Where does thought come from? I mean, dumb shit to me. Because it's stuff that's technically, if I could unravel it and explain it some evolutionary thing, you're not going to accept it either way. But also, you don't really know where this stuff ultimately comes from. You want to say God card and then it fixes everything.
It's so funny that when you say those things, what comes to my mind is fewer fucks I could not get.
Right. So I'm sitting here and he's like, you don't believe in miracles. And I'm like, well, no, I don't believe in miracles. I'm looking at the biblical definition and seeing, I can give you examples of what they are. And we all know what they are. We see them in the text. Whoa, the arm came back. Whoa, the dead just came out of the grave. Oh my God, he's walking on water. A miracle to him was explain logic without using logic. Oh, you can't? Well, logic is miraculous. You believe in a miracle now or something. And I'm like, these are the deceiving word games that apologetic presupper types use. And he was using this. And I'm like, they spend every day, all day talking about this stuff, but you're not in my arena.
Yeah.
Like, you're not talking mythology. You're not talking textual, historical approaches that I take. At around 4 hours-ish, I can't remember the exact numbers, I'm like done, dude. And I'm also flustered with Jim Bob getting more and more ridiculous with these kind of things. And then they bring this guy in whose name is Jay. And Jay comes at me with some shit. I'm already up the ear with it. Ha ha. And like, I'm already at this point when this guy shows up. And then he starts bringing in these like questions to try and like gotcha kind of things. Again, I can sense the bullshit. And I'm just not having, dude, this is bullshit. I'm trying to treat you guys like we're having an honest conversation. It's not honest. And clearly I'm not, I don't know your language. I don't use your language and play these games that you're playing with. So I got ambushed. And then there's this like parade of, I would say, people who think like them and run in these kind of circles, but aren't serious. There's no one in any institution or academic level that ever takes this kind of stuff serious. Then I got a philosopher to come in because I'm not one. And I said, hey, what's up with this? What do you think? It's all rubbish. What they're doing is rubbish. They're running a script on you. They're literally just full of it. And no one's taking them serious.
Is that Alex Malpass?
Alex Malpass. And I imagine other philosophers I could talk to, Stephen Woodford, but not just Stephen, like Alex O'Connor, these guys would come in and just wipe the floor with what these guys are doing. Literally would. Make them look bad. As they know philosophy, I don't. Come to my historical, mythological comparison side, see what happens. You know how you can set it in a video. I said, you want to talk Bible?
Yeah.
I'll whoop your ass or something. I can't remember what it is. I was so angry. They think that means I got annihilated. Then Michael Joseph, I got annihilated. Like, they're doing all these tricks. You had an experience. Can you tell us about yours?
Yeah. So there's an unsavory fellow by the name of Darth Dawkins who, yeah, I mean, so I'd known about him for at least some time at that point. This is several years ago. The video is still up on YouTube. If you want to see me get annihilated, you can go watch it. The death of Joshua.
We were hung like a hook. That was our hook. That's right.
Josh's descent to the netherworld. You know?
Yeah. And it really is the netherworld. Go ahead.
So at this time, he frequented the app Discord, I guess. And I'd never been on Discord before, I don't think. Or I hadn't gone on it much.
Right.
I think we actually had a Discord for Digital Hammurabi that Megan set up. And I initially went on there and like I had no idea what I was doing. And so for like a year or so, maybe more, I just hadn't really done anything at all. Anyway, so I'd certainly never gone into like these rooms. So that morning, I went into the server, I think was the Politics and Religion server. And I went in and saw a room and there was like, I don't know, 10 or 12 people in there. So I clicked into it and I was going to get a cup of coffee at Starbucks and I started listening, and within a couple of minutes, I don't even know if it was that long, they were like, Digital, is that Dr. Josh? And so I came off of mute and I was like, yeah, it's sorry, I don't ever come into these things. And they're, oh, it's so great to have you here. And like, we're talking and it was super nice. Yeah. And I was just, oh, this is great. So I talked for like 15, 20 minutes and I said, look, I've got a meeting. I've got to go, but thank you so much for having me in here. So did my meeting. Later on that afternoon, I'm sitting there doing some paperwork and I thought, that was really fun. Let me go back in there and I'll just kind of listen in.
Yeah.
So I opened the app back up and there's like 80 some people in this room or some much larger.
It's afternoon. Right.
And I see the name Darth Dawkins in there. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. Well, let me pop in here and see what's being talked about because everybody talks about it. So I go in there and I wasn't in there for very long. Minute, two. He says, Digital Hammurabi, is that Dr. Joshua Bowen? So I'm like mid writing something. And so I scramble to like trying to get my phone and because it turned off by this point. Yeah. As I'm trying to like open it up and come off of mute. I said, yeah, that's me. Oh, how is it that God does not exist?
Right out the gate. Yeah, the money. And I'm like,
I don't really get into philosophy. I'm just kind of here to listen. Oh, well, you're one of these talking head atheists, aren't you? You go on all these different streams to defend atheism. So how is it that God, certainly you can spare us some time to defend your non-God belief? And I'm like, okay, I don't really do philosophy. I'm just in here to kind of listen to what you guys were talking about. And so finally, I'm like, okay. And of course, by this point, somebody had started recording it.
Yeah, of course. There's always somebody.
For an hour and a half, I engage, right? I'm trying to do it very honestly. He'd say, and it just went in a circle. Yeah, how is it that God does not exist? And I say, well, I don't know that God doesn't exist. And he said, why don't you think God exists? Oh, okay. Well,
That's a different question.
yeah. So when I think about ancient texts and I think about ancient God beliefs and how the Hebrew Bible or the Bible came into existence, and I'd say it just seems like this is all, very man-made mythologies. And he said, but that doesn't necessitate that God doesn't exist, doesn't prove God doesn't exist. And I'd say, yeah, I know. And he would say, so why doesn't God exist? And it was just this.
Yeah. He's running a script.
Yeah. And so, but it was really, it went much better. He was much kinder than I anticipated him being.
You're also a gentle person, though, because for me, I'd be a little more like,
at the end of this thing, I said, look, I feel like we're kind of going in circles here. I've got to get some stuff done because I can't do two things at once. And so I said, but it's been really nice. And, I offered to send him a PDF copy of my book. And he said, no, I'll buy it. I think you should be paid, the work that you do or whatever. And I was like, it's so nice, So I got off of there thinking, oh my gosh, like this went so well.
Right.
Come to find out, immediately after this or shortly thereafter, I was a deer in the headlights and utterly
destroyed the whole nine, the typical toxic language.
So, he's come at me since then a couple of times. He'll come into a Q&A or he'll come into a room that I'm in. And I think I have learned his kryptonite, for me anyway. Because the last time he turned on me when I was in a room, I'd say, he asked me the standard, how does God not exist or whatever. And I'd say, Darth, we've gone over this, I think, as much as we can go over it. So I'm not really interested in talking about philosophy with you, but I'd say if you want to talk to me, we can talk about anything in the Hebrew Bible. So go ahead. What do you want to talk about in the Hebrew Bible? Oh, if you're going to behave like a child. Yeah.
That's what he does.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's fine.
That's what Jay did to me, by the way. Where I'm like, let's go to Bible, let's go to mythology. Like it's the same kind of shtick.
Yeah. And it's like, look, I'm not a philosopher. I've told you that from the beginning. I don't do philosophy. I really don't care. Honestly, there are people that, do this. It's like, I don't care about, medieval history. That's not really my thing. There are people that do it, and that's great, and I'm glad that they do. But, philosophy, I'm glad there are people that do it. I don't care. Like, it's just...
But the sad part about their category of philosophy is when you talk to philosophers who actually go to school for this, it's almost like their form of philosophy is like young earth creationism, where if you talk to actual scientists, they're going to go, this is not even taken serious in any field of science, anywhere, any institution, anywhere. Now, to a young earth creationist, they don't care because they have the truth. Everyone's wrong.
Right.
But like, if you're looking at philosophers and you're asking them to be, let's engage this seriously, and you're saying, well, what institution can I go to take their philosophy further? They'd go, none. There's no legitimate philosophy. They're working with like a flawed, complete model and doing apologetics that isn't taken seriously.
There's this unaccredited online course that I could take.
You get what I'm saying? So this comes back to kind of the Billy thing with Wes. Now, Wes is not doing precept apologetics. He is doing an evidentialist kind of thing. But there is this repetitive, I'm finding thing. It's almost a scriptish kind of thing that happens with evidentialists. And that is image of God, Bible's unique and different. It is not dependent on, it's polemic, but not dependent. We talked about this stuff.
Yeah.
And there's like this weird thing that you also start to pick up amongst the evidentialists that repeat what I would say is either distracting or dishonest in some cases on how they're dealing with slavery, how they're dealing with ethical issues for the Bible. Like, they have their own script in a way. It's not the same as, I'll be honest, the precepts is the most cringy, absolute, ridiculous, dumbest conversation. Like, I don't even want to have a conversation with people like that. at this point,
Yeah, but that's because you can't instantiate the necessary preconditionals of the gauging of provision of impossible possibilities to the ground of all beings.
with the atomic astrophysical, make up some more shit kind of thing. Yeah. I'm just teasing. But yeah, honestly, it's because I don't really one of those things when I actually try to gauge it seriously, I'm like, it doesn't prove your case either.
Right.
Oh, you're gonna sit here and argue this and then go, I think there's something. And if I just go with you because I'm running your script and go, all right, so there's a God, I'll just give it to you. Let's have it because I'm tired of doing this bullshit. Okay, you have a God. Now connect that and prove that's Jesus.
Exactly. Like,
Hey, this is good luck because they all know the Bible.
this is what I always say in these contexts, because the people that run this script on me, when I give them any time to do so, these are always people that are fundamentalist evangelicals, right? And so my question is always back to them, like, I don't really care if a God exists, so let's just assume it. Why are we starting at that end?
What do I go with the known and then work backwards?
Yeah, let's talk about your text that you say is infallible and inspired, and like let's start there with your God,
Right.
right? And again, like, to be clear, I kind of going back to the Wes Huff part of this, trying to create this distance between earlier Mesopotamian mythologies and what we see in Genesis account, I just think is unnecessary, because no one would say that Eminem is not a creative genius. Nobody would say that.
Just as he's utilizing or inspired by earlier songwriters or music.
That's right. And in the same way that if, an architect is pulling from, or a painter is pulling from earlier models, or, earlier styles or genres, and then building upon it to create his own or her own new thing, like, nobody ever thinks less of that artist for utilizing and building upon, or that, like, every writer, every author is utilizing earlier data, earlier content in order to create their new, to bring about their new creations. So
So yeah, your point is an important one, that you can still have it where it's dependent and still find uniqueness in your model. And I think that's what most of the progressive, more liberal Christians who accept Genesis as mythology, it borrows from earlier motifs and reworks them. Like, and it never is it's just water off the duck's back to them. It doesn't bother their faith at the end of the day, that kind of stuff, which is also why I was still blown away at the resistance to Inanna. Like, you're talking about an ancient text that's talking about a goddess that dies and is dead for 3 days and 3 nights and then is brought back to life. We're talking a completely different language, a completely different culture. Here you have Jesus, who dies and rises again after 3 days and 3 nights. Like, you could try to say maybe somehow along the way there's influence because of this earlier stuff. And it may be in the cultural air that people had death and rebirth, or death and resurrection, or some form of coming back to life. Well, no, and that is established in the Greco-Roman world. I know that to be a fact. But to argue that Jesus, the gospel author, looked back to this Sumerian, or maybe the myth got reworked into a Greco, who knows? Sure. But like, you could still accept the facts about Inanna in the myth and go, doesn't affect mine. I mean, Jones does this all the time.
sure.
Look how close I got Dionysus to Jesus, right? Even if he granted that Jesus was outdoing Dionysus, he could still say, yep, just to show that he's the true one.
This is why, again, I think the problem that apologists that put up this kind of resistance face, at least internally, is that they don't want to change their interpretive model. And the interpretive model is very often, either implicitly or explicitly, that there is a type of uniqueness to their sacred text.
Right.
So much so that there's only a certain amount of dependence that is allowable before
it looks and is like the other one.
That's right.
Like its ontological status is equivalent to the ontological status of the other, which means the truth of it is not the truth. True truth.
And this is why, though, I think the Anzu myth and its connection to the Enuma Elish, and we haven't even talked about this, but those connections, those two texts, their connection to the later Akkadian myth of Era and Isham, it's so important because there's intertextuality everywhere in the ancient Near East. And this is why when you see in the Psalms, when Yahweh is called the rider on the clouds, you don't have to balk at, is that like reworking an epithet of Baal to say it's not that storm god, it's my God? When you see in Isaiah 27:1, do you have to balk at, is this pulling from the Baal cycle? You don't have to worry about that under this interpretive framework, because you say, yeah, like this is how theology is done in the ancient world.
Right.
They're utilizing these earlier mythological texts and saying, not that one, this one, right? Not that God, my God, or not that representation of the deity, my representation of the deity, whatever. Like, it doesn't have to, nothing has to rise and fall from an inspirational standpoint, except your particular interpretive framework.
Yeah. So again, we talked with Billy about facts. And if you want to go beyond the facts, in which everyone does in a way, right? Like what? Okay, I'll give you an example. I could talk to a liberal progressive Christian who will look at me and go, yep, I think Adam is mythology. I think the creation myth is mythology. I think Noah's mythology. I think the Tower of Babel's mythology. I think Abraham's mythology. I think Jacob's mythology. I think Joseph's story is mythology. I think Moses' story is loaded with mythology. We get down to David and they might go, maybe there's some historical legend building around a guy who might have been like a chieftain down here. They call the king according to these texts, but he was like a small little ruler of an area. And then it blew up as legends do. And he's bigger and he's got this dynasty and there's just Solomon. And he's like, and they're probably echoing larger Assyrian and Babylonian kingship kind of stuff, and they're making Solomon like this, oh, he rules so much, but really that's just riffing off of Shalmaneser the third, or like different kinds of things, right? Okay. They could walk hand in hand with me, and at the end of the day go, but I think this is inspired by God. Yeah. And I go, well, I think this is evidence of doing exactly what all the other ancient Near Eastern cultures are doing, and I don't think those gods are real, so I think this walks and talks in very similar ways. Unique differences theologically, or their narrative is purposely doing something different compared to this other one, but it doesn't give me any more additional faith kind of thing, like this is different. And if the honest, I think, progressive thinker in that respect was being fair with me, they would go, yeah, I have faith, yes. And that's a different category than me making historical or mythical arguments. And I'm cool with that. We might get tense when we get closer to Jesus because that's the faith area. Maybe some are cool with even going there and we're going, yeah, you interpret it that way. I think that there's something magical about it. Maybe there's something to it. Delcy Allison Jr. said in 1970 something, he had an experience. And I can't argue with the experience. I mean, I could say what I think might be happening, but he said, I don't think it's hallucination. I had an experience and that's my thing. I respect that.
Sure.
To Billy's point, and to Wes, again, at the end of the day, Billy felt like what we felt from Jay or what you felt from Darth, in a sense that like, you thought maybe this was going to go kind of well, but like realizing by the end of it, maybe this wasn't. And Billy did not feel like he was at his best or even performed at his best clearly in this. So he wanted to take it down. And I know some people, I know Jacob Berman, for example, History Valley, if he doesn't like something that's out there of him, he'll request that it isn't put out there, and he gives a better version of what he wants out there instead of the representation of himself that isn't at its best. I know that from experience with him. With me, I got hit out of nowhere. There's no way in hell these people would be interested in taking down a conversation that I have with Jay Dyer.
Sure.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't care. What I guess might irritate from time to time is idiots online. And I say that like, you can say I'm being derogatory, but whatever. Like when you show up in my chat and you are saying, Jay slapped you and annihilated you and I saw it. It's like, tell Jay to come talk to me about myths. That's all right. Let's see how he looks at the end of a conversation when we get into comparative mythology. We start talking about Bible. Yeah. You start talking about these texts and what these texts say. let's go into theology, let's go into mythology, let's go into the material of the Bible together and have a conversation. This time, let me be the script rub.
And see, this is where the fundamental difference is, though. In that scenario, if J. Dyer were to come in and say, all right, look, I'm not an expert in mythology.
I would be gentle with it.
Yeah. You would be like, okay, so look, here's what I think.
Here's what
Yeah. And not, aha, now my moment for triumph. Because see, here's the thing. Hollow winds do nothing for me. I mean, winds in general don't do anything for me because that's not why I'm out here. But a hollow win, like what does that do for me? And I think it's frustrating when people are out here. Here's what I said. I said this off air before we started. Stop me if I didn't. If I've said it all, I don't know anymore.
I don't know what you say.
Yeah. I think it's frustrating to me. Could we cut that out? I think it's frustrating to me if, in fact, Wes were interested in Billy's position insofar as his strongest position, and he wanted to have that be put forward, and then to critique the strongest position. And I think maybe what he would have done is said, hey, Billy, next week we're going to have this conversation. Here's a list of questions that I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you about the Enumelish. I'm going to ask you about Apologists.
But you're focusing on the Hebrew Bible. He really wanted to capitalize on the Sinai Bible thing pertaining to Jesus being crucified.
In either case, it would have been, because all I can speak to is like my area of expertise, but like asking the question, can you summarize the Enumelish? That sort of tips his hand to me that he's trying to catch him off guard. He's trying to in other words, I don't think that he emailed him beforehand and said, look, I'm going to ask you to summarize the Enumelish. Right. Make sure you're like ready to do that. I think it was meant to be this gotcha moment.
Like, where can I find any weak spot to win?
And that's the thing. This is why, like when we had that conversation, and my memory's so terrible, but when Trent Horn and Gavin Oatland and Kip and
yes,
like I'm pretty sure we sent each other in advance, like, look, here's the stuff that we're going to ask about. Because the reality is good conversations that are meant to educate and to move things forward. Like, the days are gone, as I understand, I'm not an attorney, but the days are gone of like springing in court, new evidence that the defense or the prosecution doesn't have time to review, right? To try to catch them off guard. Like the discovery is, all right, look, here's the bloody knife, right?
Facts, the evidence.
Here's the videotape. Well, now you've got X amount of time to review it so that you can be prepared to give an adequate defense of why it's there.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because it's just rhetorical. You're not actually getting to the facts of the matter.
Right.
If the person doesn't have adequate time or ability to mount a well thought out defense or presentation.
So this was my takeaway, just getting outside of your area into the whole Sinai Bible thing, just to make one comment. I think Wes went into it with this in mind mostly, not saying he didn't have the other stuff in mind too, but I think Wes went into this goal, what do you mean Sinai Bible? Because his specialty is in the literature, specifically the manuscript Bibles, if you will, of Sinaiticus. I don't know if Vaticanus is his specialty, like if there's, I don't know how honed into each text their specialty is, but he is a textual guy. And he knows Sinaiticus has Jesus being crucified because it's like a complete Bible of like pretty much what the standard Bible ends up becoming. And it has what we would be reading often in our translations today, pretty much, okay? I'm sure there's some discrepancies in words from such certain versions we have today. But the point is the bold claim that Billy made was Jesus isn't crucified in the Sinai Bible. He goes, let me clarify, what do you mean Sinai Bible? You mean Sinaiticus? Yeah. Well, then he's like, actually, after he searched it, he goes, I mean Gospel of Barnabas or something to this effect. And Wes went, oh, well, even then, I'm glad you brought that up. Now we're talking about a forgery, the Gospel of Barnabas. And here's my thing. If I'm actually wanting to educate, this would have been the perfect time as an expert, and I am not an expert. Let me just say this from the record. Wes knows way more about these texts, the textual manuscript stuff, and their language, and maybe even manuscript differences and papyri and stuff than I do. I'm no expert. He's a PhD student, not a PhD. He's working to get it. Hope he gets it. Yeah, sure. Hope he learns and keeps learning because, it's good to be more educated. The more educated we are, I feel like we'll get away from some of the more sillier, infantile kind of things. My opinion. I hope he doesn't, continue down a complete apologetic route to the point where it's kind of like Frank Turek's next, Anyway, you get the point. But here's my only critique. This would have been the perfect time that while critiquing Billy, if Billy is erroneous, which I think Billy was incorrect about these things, to go, hey, Billy, I get what you're trying to say. These texts are not the go-to I would go to. There are patristic authors that indicate that there were early Christians, such as Basilides and Clement of Alexandria's Against Heresies. He indicates there were early Christian Gnostic, we call them Gnostics. They're Gnostic groups, I guess, Gnostic. And they have this idea in some of these texts. I think Gospel Peter, I'm off the top of my head. Forgive me, I'm just speaking from the hip. There's like 2-3 different texts that we have, and the Nag Hammadi library indicates some of this stuff, which scholars point to 2nd century probably in terms of these texts being written by Gnostic type groups who thought, in some cases, Jesus is watching from above, down below, and seeing someone else being crucified in his place. In one of them, Basilides says, Simon of Cyrene, the very person in the Gospel of Mark that carries the cross for him, was crucified instead of him. And this is where that funny movie, The Life of Brian, makes a funny mockery at the end of the movie. Jesus is walking with the rest of the guys with this cross carrying it. And then the Roman soldier makes this guy Simon to help him carry his cross. And then out of nowhere, they go right around the corner where the Romans can't see the soldiers. And Jesus is like, Simon starts to hold it and Jesus just runs away. And the Simon's like, hey, hey, hey. And then the Roman's like, carry your cross, come on. And like, Simon's like, but this isn't my cross. And like, it's a joke. Like he ends up going all the way to the end and being crucified instead of Jesus. It's a joke on this early thing that we do find. Now, if I were Wes, I'd go, I just don't think it's as historically reliable to believe Jesus wasn't crucified because I go to Paul's letters or I go here and triangulate point to where I think this Jew got crucified. But here's the theological reasons why they thought he did. He does not educate like that. It's all about, you're wrong about Barnabas. You're wrong about Sinai Bible. This is the perfect time as an expert who knows this. I can't think Wes doesn't know what I'm talking about here to go, there is this idea. I just don't think it's as historically reliable as a Jew who got crucified. And here's my case. And here's why. And you don't have to accept it, but if you think Jesus wasn't crucified because the Quran seems to indicate it, some of the Gnostic texts seem to indicate it, maybe you want to question that, Billy. You might want to reinvestigate, re-examine. No. As you point out, how can I catch you wrong? But your audience, the viewers that watch, the millions that see this, will now think there's no early voices that thought Jesus wasn't crucified. There were.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't early enough to you. But I feel like it's a sleight of hand a little bit. The perfect time to educate is to go, I get what you're doing. You're wrong about these texts. Here's why, as he did. But there is voices. He doesn't do that.
And this is why it was so confusing to me, as we talked about elsewhere, that the overarching feeling that I got from that section about the relationship, the intertextuality between the Elish and Genesis 1 was to minimize it. And these are just broad parallels that aren't actually, there isn't this dependency. And yet, that's not steel manning the position. Now, if Wes isn't aware of the data, that's one thing. But it sounded like he was.
He acted confident.
But it sounded like he understood that there are enough connections between the two texts. Scholars overwhelmingly think that there's some aspect of a polemic or an apologetic or whatever going on. And so, again, steel manning your opponent's position. I'm not saying that there's never a time to use rhetoric to point out the problems with an opponent's position. I'm not saying that. For example, I will do this. I go on TikTok quite a bit on a show called Thinker, and it's a panel that Christians will come up, Christian apologists, often very conservative Christians will come up and argue this back and forth, and I end up sort of playing the role of fact checker when I'm up there. And quite often, a Christian will come up, and I've become more accustomed to matching energy. I have become a little more inclined to match energy at this point. So if somebody comes up and has a conversation with me, I always start off very kind and gentle, and I can understand that. But there are some people that they just want that smoke, right? And they come up there, guns blazing. And quite often, they will do it to people on the panel that are very interested in educated non-specialists. And so they'll come up there and they'll be like, you're completely wrong about this thing about the Exodus or about the Hebrew or whatever. And in a very mocking tone. And so again, I will match energy slowly, usually. But if somebody consistently puts up this front of, I'm an expert, I'm so much smarter than you, you're so dumb, particularly in these types of areas where, I don't know, they're just being indignant. They're being recalcitrant and claiming over and over again that they have this expertise or that I don't know what I'm talking about. At that point, I may say, tell me about your formal training in Hebrew. Okay, so you know Hebrew. All right. Can you tell me what the text, can you just read the text for me? So it's not a do you remember what the exact words are? Something is, here, look, I'll put it up on the screen. Can you read that for me? Something very reasonable they should be able to do.
They have that expertise.
That's right.
So, yeah.
So I'm not saying that there aren't moments, but that even there, the moment the person says, yeah, all right, look, I don't have that expertise. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, once they sort of back off and they go, sorry, that you're right. I don't have that expertise. I overstepped. They go, oh my gosh. We all do that sometimes. Then it all dies down. And I go back to steel manning their positions. And I think, I don't know, it always rubs me the wrong way when I see people, as you say, they know the data is that you assume, given their expertise, they know that this data exists. And instead of steel manning the other person's position and saying, I know you said this, but probably what you mean is this other text, or the one that you want to use is this other text. And instead of just knocking down a straw man argument.
Yeah, again, if we're getting technical, Billy would have been factually incorrect on the Sinaiticus not having the crucifixion, or maybe, and I don't even know the history behind the Gospel of Barnabas, but that forgery idea he brought up. But the idea of crucifixion not happening according to certain texts early on in Christianity, and of course Islam seems to echo it later on, that could have been conveyed better. And still, you could have still defended your historical, my of course, idea that Jesus. And yes, I agree with you. Yeah, I think we nailed that one pretty down. Yeah. Any final words from you?
No, this is it's been great. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Go sign up for his Sumerian courses, Hebrew Bible. We got an MVP course. There's a bunch of stuff. Go check out the description. Support Dr. Josh. Check us out. We really appreciate it, and keep learning. Keep learning. Don't let people discourage you with negative energies or toxic kind of stuff. Just push right through that and go explore this stuff. Be on a journey of your own of truth. And that's what I do. I just keep going and learn for the best. So